So as we talk about turning points part two, we want to make sure that you guys, again, summer of 1863 seems to be the year where they finally decided we need to break the back of the Confederacy the mind shift. Lincoln's eastern side fighting in Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina is fought with hard resistance. He can't seem to find a general. All the major generals have all sided with the Confederacy. So all the experienced ones for the most part. So he spends 1861, 2, and 3, and really most of 1864 trying to get a general that will be aggressive in the Eastern Theater. While in the Western Theater, the generals are doing just fine. They cut off the Mississippi. The plan is working. So 2/3 of the plan have worked. The blockade is working. Britain has backed off. Lincoln has passed the Emancipation Proclamation after Antietam. So the British and the French have already banned slavery in Europe. Slavery is not an issue like that. Didn't say it wasn't racism. Racism's still there, but slavery and not giving people of color their rights is not an issue in Britain or in France or even in Germany like it is here in the Americas. So they are reluctant now to join in to Confederacy now that Mr. Lincoln is like, we're trying to end slavery over here and make them change up. So Britain kind of backs off. They're like, well, we need to let y'all finish it. Meanwhile, in the Western side, a guy named Grant and Sherman are slowly but surely taking the Mississippi River. And so this is where the Western side of the Anaconda Plan, part 1 and 2 are working very well. Whereas part 3 is just been a muddled mess. So George McClellan was his Union general, but again, he ends up firing him. McClellan is a capable commander, but he's not. He really is a Union. He's a Confederate sympathizer, and is real slow in trying to even fight at all. He didn't really want the conflict. And so he stalls him out, and Lincoln finds like, look, if you can't take Richmond to finish this thing, you got everything you need. You got the money, you have the resources. We are actually outnumbering them 4-1. What's the problem? And I don't want to get beat on the battlefield. It was excuse after excuse. Finally, Lincoln gets fed up, and he fires General George McClellan and brings in Ambrose Burnside. And Burnside isn't even as good as McClellan. So he starts having these blunders too, because he doesn't want to get beat on the battlefield, which caused him to get beat. Burnside happens to go with his name. You know, you see him have these weird sideburns, but his actual name is Burnside. And he's known for having huge sideburns. Burnside loses Fredericksburg, which is on the other side of DC, gets embarrassed by Lee again, and he gets fired. Lincoln is like, I need a general that can go ahead and take Virginia. So then he brings up the new commander, as you see right here on the right, Joseph Hooker. Hooker comes in. Again, these generals are really nervous about fighting General Lee in Virginia. They just don't want to do it. They know how good of a tactician he is, how skilled he is, and they're not convinced they can actually beat him in modern warfare, at the time. But Hooker was a soldier. So anecdotal note, when you talk about derogatory names for women, Hooker, if you ever heard of hookers before, this is where it comes from. General Hooker liked to keep his men in high morale. And so he had women follow the army as part of the army's supply lines. So the men could be entertained when they weren't marching and everything else. So he would have women come up down from the north and other towns and everything else. And The first name used to be for hookers girls, is what it used to call it, and then the name stuck. So when you talk about prostitutes or whores, uh, that's where the name hookers for women came from, because this general uh, liked to have his men entertained with women in the barracks and after at night and everything else to keep their spirits up while they were waiting for their wives. So that's where the name comes from. After Hooker loses at Chancellorsville, Lincoln jumps to another general. So his patience has ran out with generals. He just starts shuffling them like a deck of cards. He brings up George Meade. Meade is a little bit more capable, a little bit more aggressive, but at the same time, he's still cautious. They are scared of Lee. So what is happening as Lee looks at this situation? He looks at it and says, you know what, if Mr. Lincoln keeps shuffling generals, I need to put the pressure on him because there's no real command of the Union Army. So what he decides to do is travel to Pennsylvania, because maybe he's in Virginia. I'm going to go through Maryland and I'm going to attack Pennsylvania somewhere to take the pressure off of Virginia. If I can win, that may force Lincoln's hand as people will be like, okay, this war is too much, and threaten Pennsylvania or New York. And so he goes to Gettysburg. So he takes the Army of Virginia, the biggest army, he takes the Army of Virginia, and he marches them up into the north, hoping to get a sound victory up there, not play defense, but play offense. I can strike a death blow on the Union, especially with no generals, Lincoln might have to relent, as you know, the governors of Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and New York will be like, this is too much, and finally break his back. So it happens over 3 days. It's one of the most horrific and bloodiest war battles in the whole war. As you look at almost 50,000 people or dead bodies of dead soldiers, and that's not even to count the wounded. That's just dead. Okay, 23,000 on the Union side, 28,000 on the Confederacy side. But the Union wins. General Meade wins, and Lee is forced to go back into Virginia with even less soldiers than he had when he went up there. What's the impact of it? What we want you to know overall before you watch the video is that England, once and for all, is not going to help the Confederates. They have proven they can't beat the resources of the Union. And now Lee is completely defensive now. He doesn't have enough soldiers. Remember, they're already tactical. And for him to take the chance and going offensively and lose, now he has to play a defensive war and try to stall out with no resources coming from any other country. It's almost inevitable that you're going to lose. All we have to do now is speed up the process. You don't have enough resources or soldiers to continue to fight. Nevertheless, they're going to fight anyway. We're going to make a way to fight because that's what we are. We're Americans and we're going to fight. And so now we're looking at a situation numerically that they're going to try to drag this thing out for 3, 4, 5 more years. Here's a picture at Gettysburg. This is where, get a picture, you see all the people that are dead on the battlefield. If you didn't know, Mr. Lechner is from Pennsylvania. He went to Gettysburg College. If you ever seen Remember the Titans movie, that's where they were. They went to Gettysburg College and they made a college there. It's still a small town to this day, but the actual battleground actually turned out into the town. Gettysburg is not much bigger than Graham. So imagine Graham getting, you got people fighting in the streets, trying to fight between buildings and everything else, and then finally out there in the farm and open areas. Because of so many people dead, guys, so many people died on the battlefield, don't know where they are. You just know they're Confederates or Union soldiers out there. They decided to create a cemetery at Gettysburg. I mean, it's 1863 in the summer heat. These bodies are decomposing fast. There's no way to send them anywhere else. You gave them a shallow grave. This is the invention or the widespread use, guys, where we talk about cemeteries. Instead of using churches to bury, members of your church congregations and everything else. So now you see them just like here at Graham, the city cemetery that's out here. And you do have a few people that were born, that were Civil War veterans that are out here in the cemetery behind the school, on the other side of the school. So Lincoln rides up to Gettysburg to commemorate on both sides all of the soldiers that had died in defense of Gettysburg and in the attack of Gettysburg at the battle. It's only a 2-minute address, but commencing, like I said, as a military cemetery at Gettysburg once and for all the bodies that were buried out there, had to be buried out there. He decides to go out there and give a 2-minute speech that becomes world famous, as short as it is, as trying to create a new United States of America. Meantime, while in the East, not saying Grant, but Lee is moving back to Virginia, and Lincoln comes up and gives his Gettysburg address. Vicksburg, Mississippi is a port on the Mississippi River, and winning this town would literally cut off the head of the snake. The Union already has New Orleans blockaded. And so the Union was sending what little supplies they could from New Orleans up the Mississippi River to parts of Virginia and Alabama and everything else. So they're like, once we cut Vicksburg off, that completely severs the ties of using the Mississippi River for as far as Arkansas and Texas are concerned, and making sure they can't get supplies into the interior from farms and everything else. So a guy named U.S. Grant, who's one of the commanders, who's the main commander in the West, he leads a siege or a blockade. We call it a siege when you do it on land. It's a blockade when you do it on a port. So after weeks of fighting, he entrenches Vicksburg. They run out of supplies. They can't get off the river. They can't move on the river. They can't leave the city. It takes them about 4 or 5 weeks to do it. And finally, on July 4th, the city surrenders. The Union takes the city. All this stuff happens on that July 4th week. Okay, so the week of July 4th, 1863 culminates with Gettysburg losing, Lee losing in the Eastern Theater, and then Grant taking Vicksburg and closing off the Mississippi in the West. So this is like, hey, we're about to go ahead and put the juggernaut in. But the Union won't. They won't quit. The Confederates won't quit, and this is where we are. So overall plaque. This is a picture of U.S. Grant. We're gonna talk about him as he leads the Reconstruction. The Anaconda Plan is working. Grant becomes promoted to the commander. Meade gets fired, and because Grant has worked the plan in the West so well, he is now promoted to overall commander of the Union. Probably should have been done 2 years earlier, but Lincoln finally promotes Ulysses Grant into the supreme commander and brings him to the Eastern Theater to confront Lee. And so we can go ahead and end this. All right. Tomorrow we'll pick up with Sherman's march to the sea.